It's Friday morning, and the internet is on fire. Nearly the entire eastern side of the United States has been knocked offline. Twitter, Amazon, and Netflix, amongst many others, are now completely unusable for hours on end. People are calling it the largest cyber attack in history, and everyone is wondering, who's behind all of it, and why did it all stem from Minecraft? When he was just 12 years old, Paris Jaw became fascinated with computers. He spent his free time studying programming, and within a few years, he'd become fluent in multiple programming languages, including but it wasn't until high school where he was introduced to the game Minecraft. He instantly fell in love with the game and would eventually use his previous coding experience to launch a Minecraft server of his own. Paris was hit with a denial of service attack. You see, the Minecraft server industry is an extremely competitive business. Because there's so much money to be made, there are plenty of server owners that will pay hackers thousands of dollars to take out their competitors, in hopes that once the server goes offline, the remaining players will start funneling into their server as a result. Paris studied these attacks in depth, finding out how they worked, and more importantly, how to execute them. Over at Rutgers University, things are not as they seem. For the second time in the 2015 school year, all of the internet services across the entire university get taken down. Special software like Sakai, which controls all of the university's courses, assignments, and grading, also goes completely offline. In the meantime, word starts to spread. The official university Twitter account made a tweet announcing that they were, quote, experiencing intermittent network problems. After a couple hours, everything gets fixed, the servers come back online, and everyone just sort of moves on. However, no one was actually able to figure out why it happened in the first place, whether the outage was due to a major computer failure or a purposeful attack. Nonetheless, all would be made clear just 1 month later, when the network of Rutgers University would go offline yet again in a third outage. This time, it would last for over 4 days. Now more than ever, it was apparent that the school was a dedicated target of some major DDoS attacks, and students were furious for a number of reasons. Not only did the attack take place right in the middle of exam week, which had to be subsequently delayed, but it also stretched over into the class registration period, meaning that students were not only potentially missing out on registering for their preferred classes next semester, they couldn't even study or finish the exams from the classes they were already in. Amidst the chaos, an anonymous Twitter account had suddenly appeared with a link to a Pastebin thread. In it, the user seemingly took responsibility for all 3 of the DDoS attacks that happened so far, claiming that
the Rutgers IT department is a joke. This is the 3rd time that I've launched DDoS attacks against Rutgers, and every single time, the Rutgers infrastructure crumpled like a tin can under the heel of my boot. This is a surefire sign that somebody needs to be fired.
Over the course of the following year, Rutgers University would continue to be bombarded by these DDoS attacks over a dozen more times, forcing them to pour millions of dollars into building up their cybersecurity defenses, all for them to be ripped to shreds with each new attack. And every time, Xfocus would be right there calling it and taking stabs at the company's bad defense. To make up for all the money they were spending, the university would go on to increase their tuition costs for all students by 2.3%. After hearing the news, one engineering student started a Change.org petition urging the university to reverse this change. In an interview with a local news station, he stated, "Since I came to college, I expected at least a decent internet speeds. And while it usually holds up, we get DDoS attacks every time an exam rolls around. Besides, we literally wasted all of our money because as soon as an attack was launched, it took down the network. Since there was a tuition increase, I think it's only fair that we get that money back." His petition would go on to gain over 1,000 signatures in just a day, and rightfully so. At this point, the school was just blowing money, none of their attempts to stop the attacks were working, and worst of all, the supposed hacker behind all of it was openly taunting and embarrassing them on Twitter, and still, no one had even the slightest clue who it was. That is, until years later, when, during another major controversy, an investigator randomly found an old Pastebin post which supposedly doxed the person behind these attacks. Most of this information would be deemed fake, however, it was discovered that the email in this post was the same email attached to a Hackforums account that belonged to none other than Paris Jaw. All this time, the university had suspicions that the attacks were coming from a foreign country, such as China or Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, the entire thing was being orchestrated from right inside their own dorms, while Paris was a student there from late 2014 to 2016. It all makes sense now. Paris already had both prior knowledge and the programs to execute these types of attacks from his days as a Minecraft server owner. And the reason these attacks were typically executed whenever an exam was due was that, on top of simply amusing him, it allowed Paris some extra time to study as the university recovered. And by the time he dropped out in 2016, Paris had caused over $8.6 million in damages to Rutgers, but now that he was done targeting the school, it was time to move on to something bigger. Over all this time, Paris never lost interest in Minecraft, and by now he'd formed close online friendships with 2 fellow players, Josiah White and Dalton Norman, and together, the 3 of them would delve into Paris's biggest controversy yet. The trio would begin by spreading malware. On top of the standard targets like computers and smartphones, the malware would also infect other internet-connected devices such as smart light bulbs, refrigerators, and security cameras. Once infected, nothing appears to change on the surface level. However, behind the scenes, the device has now become a zombie, joining the thousands of other infected devices just sitting there, waiting for the owner to use their combined resource power to cause some devastating attacks. This would be known as the Mirai botnet. Mirai's first target was an unnamed internet service provider. Paris sent them an anonymous email demanding $5,000 in Bitcoin, otherwise they would be hit with a DDoS attack. The company refused and was subsequently hit with over 300 gigabytes per second of internet traffic, absolutely decimating their servers. Such a strong attack was only made possible by the sheer number of devices that Mirai had infected. Its army was doubling in size every 76 minutes, and within just 20 hours of launching, Mirai had infected over 65,000 devices. And now that they knew the botnet worked, it was time to make some money. So they used Mirai to set up what's called a booter service, which is essentially a website where users can pay small amounts of money, like $5 to $50, to rent out the ability to perform smaller scale DDoS attacks using the largest botnet army in the world. One of the companies they targeted was a French hosting provider for a ton of Minecraft servers called OVH, who, after refusing to send any money, was subsequently hit with a DDoS attack containing 1.1 terabits per second of unwanted traffic. This attack began to make national headlines, and now all eyes were on Mirai. The botnet had over 300,000 individual devices under its control, and tens of thousands of active users on the booter service, passively bringing them in a ton of money in the process. And it was at this point where the trio began to realize they were in over their heads. So on September 30th, Paris and his two friends would wipe their PCs out of fear of getting caught, but not before going onto hack forums and fully releasing Mirai's source code freely available to the public. The reason why he did this was to make Mirai's origins much harder to trace. His last words on that forum post read as follows:
When I first got into the DDoS industry, I wasn't planning on staying in it that long. I made my money, but there's lots of eyes looking at IoT now. So it's time to get the f*** out.
And there it was, the largest botnet in the world, free on the internet for anyone to use. What could possibly go wrong?
Massive traffic jams on the internet superhighway. On Friday, hackers used a virtual army of hijacked DVRs and security cameras to flood a company called Dyn with tens of millions of bogus requests.
On the morning of October 21st, 2016, an unknown hacker had used Mirai to bring down the servers of Dyn, a company that controls the infrastructure for sites like Twitter, Netflix, Reddit, Amazon, and most of the eastern United States' internet. Just 2 weeks after that, however, someone totally different would use Mirai to target the internet of the entire country of Liberia, over 5.1 million people now offline. Meanwhile, in Germany, over 900,000 individual internet routers would also be knocked offline using Mirai. These attacks were unlike anything the world had ever seen before. The creators weren't worried of getting caught though. They were sure they'd covered their tracks. However, little did they realize the FBI had been actively unraveling this case for months. And by the end of the year, after following a long trail of databases, old chat logs, code snippets, and even victim interviews, they had zeroed in on 3 suspects. The entire time, the trio had been certain there was nothing to worry about. However, now they were sitting in a courtroom in Alaska, to which all 3 of them would plead guilty for their crimes under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. However, after what was noted as extensive cooperation with the FBI, the trio were only sentenced to serve a 5-year period of probation, $127,000 in fines, and 2,500 hours of community service. In order to fulfill those hours, the 3 of them would spend the next year volunteering with the FBI, helping them solve a plethora of different cases. As for Paris, he was eventually also ordered to pay back the damages he'd caused at Rutgers. Since then, he's quietly went back to school and taken a job with a Silicon Valley tech company named... Honestly, the story of Paris Jaw is truly fascinating. If you enjoyed the video, then please subscribe.